When the flood swallowed Ash Hollow, everything that could flee fled. But some things get left behind deliberately. Dorian Hale recognized the sound of a trapped animal. He'd heard it enough in another life. Yet the faint, shattered barking drifting across that black water didn't carry the pitch of something begging for rescue. It carried the tone of a sentry refusing to leave her position. Out on a collapsing roof, a dog held her ground against the current, guarding a secret someone had tried to drown on purpose. This is a story about loyalty, quiet strength, and what happens when people who've made a habit of leaving finally choose to remain. In the end, it wasn't force that pulled them through. It was faithfulness, trust, and a promise no one had to speak aloud. Where were you watching from, and how did this story sit with you? Please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers and continue telling these stories. The rain had quit, but the earth hadn't remembered how to breathe yet. Ash Hollow, Vermont, stretched out under a flat grey sky, the kind that held light but gave no warmth. Water still buried what used to be roads, fences tilted like exhausted men. Barn fragments, cracked ladders, plastic drums, all of it drifting in a current that no longer screamed but hadn't forgiven. 3 days of merciless rain had turned the countryside into something quieter, something more dangerous. Not chaos anymore. Aftermath. Dorian Hale moved through it like a man who understood both. He stood at the stern of a narrow aluminium boat, one hand steady on the motor, the other loose at his side. 38 years old, tall, around 6 feet, with a lean, compressed strength that never announced itself. Clean-shaven face, sharp in its architecture. Square jaw, defined cheekbones, the kind that caught light even beneath overcast skies. Dark brown hair cropped in a military cut, slightly longer than regulation, pushed back by habit rather than vanity. His skin carried the pallor of someone raised in cold country, but it had been weathered, etched faintly by wind and too many years spent outside. His eyes were grey-blue, steady, watchful, almost unnervingly quiet. He wore what he always wore, a faded olive-grey tactical shirt, softened by years of washing, frayed at the cuffs and shoulders. Earth-toned combat pants hung just loose enough for easy movement, knees scuffed, pockets sagging from constant use. Old military boots, water-darkened now, anchored him to the boat's unstable deck. On his wrist, a battered military watch. Scratched glass, stubborn hands, still ticking with mechanical defiance. Out here on the black water, time was bleeding away. Dorian didn't talk much. Not because he lacked things to say, because he'd learned long ago that words didn't always alter outcomes. Sometimes they just made you feel like you'd tried. The motor hummed low as he steered past what had been a gravel road. A mailbox jutted from the water at an angle, its red flag still raised, waiting for a letter that would never arrive. He slowed when motion caught his eye ahead. Not a threat, just someone still holding on. An old man stood on the porch of a half-drowned house, boots set wide, one hand locked around the railing. Early 70s, thin, slightly stooped, with a face carved by decades of wind and patient endurance. Grey hair clung wet to his scalp beneath a worn cap. A flannel jacket, red, faded, draped loose over a heavy sweater. Something solid lived in his eyes. Not calm, not fear. Recognition. The kind earned by watching the same trouble roll through too many times. "Zero," the man called out, voice rough but strong enough to carry. Dorian gave a single nod. Not agreement, acknowledgement. The man squinted toward the horizon, then spoke again. "Quieter now." Quote 2. Dorian said nothing, but his grip on the motor eased slightly. Quote 3. The man went on. Quote 4. He paused, then said it plain. Quote 5. Dorian turned his head just enough to find the man's eyes. Wrong how? The old man shifted his weight on the porch boards. Like it ain't barking to warn, he said. Like it's running out of air. Silence held between them for a beat. Then Dorian dipped his chin and pushed the throttle forward. He didn't say he'd check. Didn't need to. The further north he pushed, the less the land made sense. Trees tilted at wrong angles, roots clawing upward like shattered bone. A stretch of fencing drifted past, choked with weeds and torn cloth. The water behaved differently here, calm on the surface, but pulling beneath with a weight that promised depth. Dorian cut the engine. That's when it reached him. Not loud, not steady, but present. A bark, if you could still call it that. Short, fractured, forced out. Each one split by a breath that sounded like it cost something. Dorian held still, letting the sound find its place inside him. He didn't hurry. He never did. He turned the boat slowly, tracking not just direction, but pattern. 3 barks, a pause, 2, then long silence, then 1. Again. There was structure in it, purpose. He threaded the boat between 2 half-drowned trees, and there it was. A wrecked livestock pen. What remained of the wooden frame had ripped loose from its foundation and travelled downstream until it jammed between 2 thick trunks. Current pressed against it without rest, water surging beneath and around it, but the angle held. For now. The roof, what survived of it, leaned at a slant, slick with rain and mud. And standing on that unstable platform, a German shepherd. Female, mid-sized but built for purpose. Strong chest, lean, powerful frame beneath fur soaked flat against her body. Her coat, black and tan, had gone dark with water. The saddle marking nearly invisible against the rest. One ear stood rigid. The other twitched now and then, nicked along the edge. She was shaking, not from panic, from exhaustion. Her paws were spaced wide for balance, claws dug into softened wood. Every muscle looked locked in place too long. Her eyes, amber brown, deep, focused, weren't scanning. They were fixed downward. She barked again, a harsh, scraped sound that seemed to tear its way out of her throat. Then again, and again. Dorian eased the boat closer, careful not to let the current crash him into the wreckage. Easy, he said, low, steady. The dog turned her head. First time she looked at him. No wildness there. No blind fear, just calculation. She held his gaze longer than most animals would. Then she looked away, back down into the water, and barked. Louder now, faster. Her front paws shifted, tapping the roof like she was trying to mark a spot exactly. Dorian followed her sight line. The water below was murky, choked with debris. Small branches and bits of hay drifted past in slow, uneven circles. At first, nothing. Just movement, just current. Then something changed. Not a shape, not clearly. A disturbance that didn't match the flow. A flicker, gone the instant it appeared. Dorian's hand tightened on the boat's edge. The dog wasn't trying to be rescued. She hadn't moved toward him, hadn't even attempted it. She had stayed, held her ground, spent whatever strength remained, not to survive, but to keep pointing, to keep marking what lay below. Something old shifted inside Dorian's chest, a memory without full shape pressed against the edges of his mind. A voice, a moment, a choice he'd made once that had trailed him longer than it should have. He exhaled slowly. "If you're still calling it," he said, barely above a whisper, eyes on the water. Then it's still there, which meant one thing. He wasn't finished. The dog barked again, softer now, but urgent. Dorian killed the engine completely, let the boat drift just enough to line up with the wedged structure. The current pulled, testing him. He reached for the rope, secured it to a branch jutting from the water. Then he stood motionless, listening. Not just to the current, but to everything around it. The dog shifted her weight again, claws scraping faintly against wood. Her breathing came shallow and rapid, but controlled, disciplined. Dorian's gaze flicked to her neck. No modern collar, but there, beneath the matted fur, a faint line, worn smooth. Something had sat there once, something official, something that meant she didn't belong out here. He said quietly, not to the dog, not to anyone, just to the moment itself. The dog looked at him again. This time she didn't turn away. The water moved beneath them, calm on top, restless underneath, and whatever was down there was running out of time. The boat shifted just enough to prove that nothing out here held steady. Water knocked against the hull in uneven surges. Not angry, persistent, like something probing the boundaries of what he could hold together. The rope groaned where he'd lashed it to the branch, fibers pulling apart, holding, for now. Dorian adjusted his stance, boots soaked and heavy, knees bent low to ride the motion. His body did the work on its own, correcting without permission. Years of discipline had etched that deep. Balance first, response second, feeling last, always last. He reached his hand out again. He said, softer now. The German shepherd turned her head slowly. This close, she looked worse than he'd thought. Not just soaked, depleted. Her coat, once sharp black and tan, had gone flat under layers of mud and fatigue. Fur along her side, matted in uneven clumps, exposing a frame that hadn't rested in far too long. Faint scars, old ones, thin pale lines near the shoulder and down the rear leg, the kind that don't come from bad luck. Her breathing was too rapid, but those eyes, they didn't waver, locked, calm, reading him. Dorian recognized that stare, not from civilians, not from strays, from working dogs, military stock, search and rescue animals, K9 units trained not just to obey, but to assess. _14, he said low. The dog placed one deliberate paw forward. It slipped on the waterlogged wood. Claws scraped, caught. For half a second, she looked ready to leap. Then she froze. Her head whipped back toward the water. A bark ripped out, sharp, rougher than before. She pressed back to the broken roof's edge, leaning out, body tilted down, locked on something below. Dorian followed her line of sight again. This time, he didn't glance. He studied. The surface lied. Lazy ripples, floating wreckage. But beneath, something moved wrong. Not with the current, against it. A disruption, faint but intentional. Gone before he could pin it down. Dorian let the breath drain slow through his nose. ___, quote _, 15 ___, he whispered. He dropped lower, sinking his center of gravity. His eyes traced the structure with new precision. The collapsed pen wasn't just debris. It had geometry. A partial wall braced with metal brackets had buckled and wedged against the trees. Below the roofline, something darker stirred where the water ran deepest. The dog barked again, 2 fast bursts. Silence. Then one more. Dorian's gaze sharpened. Pattern, not fear. Signal. underscore underscore, quote underscore 16 underscore underscore, he said quietly. The dog gave no response to his voice, but her whole body went still. That was enough. He moved with more purpose now. Not reckless, deliberate. He cinched the rope tighter, reinforced the knot, then gripped the structure's edge and tested its strength. Wood groaned beneath him, but didn't give. Careful. Every action here demanded careful. He stepped onto the submerged beam just under the roofline. One hand wrapped around a cracked support post. The current hit harder against his legs at this depth. Shoving sideways, trying to pull his footing loose. The dog held her ground. She watched him, not guarded, not hostile, observing, waiting, as though the next move he made carried more weight than everything before it. Dorian eased himself lower, crouching where water lapped against warped wood. Cold rose from the surface, not the clean bite of winter, the thick, silted cold of floodwater, carrying dirt, wreckage, and fragments of places that no longer existed. He leaned out, eyes fixed on the shifting murk. Nothing visible. A flicker again, not light, not a reflection. Movement, small, fading, but real, gone the instant it appeared. Dorian didn't pause this time. He pulled his sleeve tight against his forearm, flexed his hand once, then looked up at the dog. "Stay," he said. The word left him without thought. A command. Clean, hard. The dog's ears shifted, her muscles coiled, but she didn't break position. She held, accepted. Dorian gave one short nod, then he dropped into the water. The cold struck him like a slab of concrete. Sudden, total. It ripped the air from his lungs before he could brace, forced a sharp, involuntary breath that scorched on the way down. He drove through it, made his body adjust. Vision dissolved into murk, brown, ash-grey, debris drifting past his face. He stretched his arms wide, fingers open, searching not by sight, by feel. Wood, broken, a jagged edge bit into his knuckles. He didn't flinch, pushed deeper. There, something soft, then a flutter, small, desperate, alive against his palm. Dorian adjusted his hold with care. Too firm and he'd crush it. Too slack and the current would steal it away. He found the shape. Tiny body, drenched fur, fragile, breathing. He drove upward, legs fighting the pull. The water resisted, dragging at him sideways, but he braced against the structure, used it as an anchor, and powered through. He broke the surface, gasping. The dog was already there, closer than before. Her head low, nose stretched toward his hands. Dorian eased the small form onto the roof. A puppy, barely anything. Its fur, probably pale once, was plastered dark with river water. Its body shook in weak spasms, chest rising in thin, uneven pulls. The mother moved in immediately, not panicked, precise. One sniff, then a single, slow lick across the pup's face. Deliberate, reading it, confirming life. Then she shifted, not settling, adjusting position. Her eyes locked back on the water. Again. Dorian followed her gaze, his breathing steadied. Underscore, quote underscore 18 underscore, he murmured. Not to her, to himself. He glanced at the fractured structure beneath the surface. The current hadn't weakened, stronger now, if anything. Support beams groaned faintly under the strain. The window was closing. The dog made a sound, not a bark, a rumble, low and buried deep in her chest. Something different. Dorian went still. It wasn't aimed at him. It wasn't fear. It was knowing. Her gaze shifted, not downward, but to the side of where he'd surfaced. A different angle, a different spot. Dorian turned his head slowly. The water there looked no different, but something underneath, something invisible, had just stirred, and whatever it was, it hadn't been there before. Dorian's jaw clenched. He looked back at the dog. She held his eyes, not begging, not asking, waiting, as if to say. Dorian dragged the back of his hand across his face, clearing water. His breathing evened out. Cold had already begun locking into his muscles, but he pushed it aside. No room for that yet. He adjusted his footing on the shifting roof. One glance at the rescued pup. Another twitch. Still alive. Still in the fight. Good. He faced the water again. The second point. Different angle. Different depth, probably. The structure beneath him protested, louder now. A clear warning. Time was running thin. Dorian rolled his shoulders once, released the tension. He said, barely audible. Then he went under. No pause. The river took him whole. This time he angled left, following the line the dog had shown him. His hands worked faster now. Surer. Metal. A loose panel scraped past his arm, then a blade-sharp edge. He caught it just before it cut deep, stopped his momentum cold. Below it, something shifted. He reached down, another small body, weaker than the first, barely there. Dorian's chest constricted. He worked it free from the wedge of debris with careful hands. For 1 second, nothing. No twitch. No resistance. Just stillness. Too still. Dorian kicked harder. Up. Now. He crashed through the surface, breath torn and ragged. The dog was already leaning in, closer than before. Dorian placed the second pup on the roof. A moment passed. Nothing. Then, a faint, stuttering breath. The smallest tremor. Alive. The mother pressed her nose against it gently. One more slow lick. Then she turned again, back to the edge, back to the water. Dorian watched her. Water ran from his hair down his jaw. His shirt sealed against his body like a second skin, cold burrowing deeper with every second. He didn't need to count this time. He already knew. There were more. The current pulsed, a sudden nudge against the structure. The rope holding the boat groaned, tighter. Everything around them was beginning to give. Dorian looked down once more into the dark water, then back at the dog. She hadn't moved, hadn't looked away, hadn't wavered. And somehow that fixed certainty in her eyes made stopping impossible. The third dive didn't start with bravery. It started with math. Dorian Hale stood braced on the tilting remnants of the roof, water streaming from his sleeves, his shirt pressed cold against his skin. His breathing had slowed, but not from calm, from force. He was making it slow. There was a difference. The river no longer roared, but it hadn't let go. Under the surface, the current worked with a silent brutality, pulling sideways, pulling down, always hunting for the next thing to drag under. Dorian looked once at the 2 pups he'd pulled free. They lay pressed together now, small soaked bodies sharing what little heat they had left. Fur matted and dark with water, their movements barely there. But life still flickered inside them. That was enough. The mother stood over them, not lying down, not resting. Her body stayed angled toward the roof's edge, ears rotating, gaze locked on the floodwater below. She didn't look at Dorian, not anymore. She didn't have to. He'd already read her. Dorian rolled his shoulders once. Stiffness was threading into the muscle now. Cold worked that way, crept in quiet, then seized everything at once if you gave it the chance. He wouldn't give it that. Not here. He stepped down toward the edge again. His boots slid on the wet wood before catching. The structure beneath him groaned low. Time wasn't just passing, it was bleeding out. He dove. The cold struck deeper this time, not sharper, heavier. It bypassed the skin and burrowed into his limbs. His fingers went dull, reaction time shaved by fractions that carried weight they shouldn't. Dorian forced his eyes open. The water returned. Nothing. Dark, silted, opaque. He moved anyway, hands sweeping through the space where memory told him the structure sat, following instinct where vision failed. There, the frame, metal buckled inward, warped but holding. The wooden shelf, he found it half by accident, half by something deeper. His fingers caught its edge just as it shifted. Not violently, but enough. Enough to tell him the whole balance was coming apart. The current leaned into the structure again, harder now, working it loose from where it had jammed. Dorian hooked his arm around the frame, made himself the anchor, then reached down and found them. Two more, smaller than the first pair, tucked close together. Their bodies pinned between a buckled plank and the metal frame, held just barely above the climbing water, just enough to keep breathing. One stirred, faintly. The other, nothing. He shifted his grip with care, fingers sliding beneath the first pup, easing it free without forcing the structure to collapse too fast. The wood groaned beneath his arm. He held still, counted, then pulled the second. It came loose with a soft giving, like something that had already stopped fighting. Dorian drove upward, kicking against the drag, angling his body toward where the surface had to be. His lungs screamed. Not panic, just physics. He broke through with a ragged gasp, pulling in air that felt thick and unwilling. The mother was already closer than before. Her nose found the first pup before he'd even laid it on the wood, then the second. Faster now, but still measured, still deliberate. She nosed one, then the other, breathing quick but controlled. The first pup twitched, a small, brittle movement. Alive. The second gave nothing back. The dog paused. 1 second. Her head dropped slightly, then she pressed her muzzle against it again. Harder. A sound came from her, not a bark, not a whine. Something lower, something older. Dorian watched, didn't move, didn't interfere. Then, a breath. Thin as thread, but real. The pup's chest rose, shallow, weak, but present. The mother went still, then she shifted, not away from her pups, back toward the edge. Dorian let the air out of his lungs slowly. "That's 4, he said, barely above a whisper. But his voice carried no certainty, because the dog hadn't settled, hadn't relaxed, hadn't stopped watching the water. For the first time since he'd arrived, she stepped away from her litter. Not far, just enough. She moved along the roofline, paused with care, body pressed low. Then she stopped at a different spot. Not where he'd just surfaced, not where the others had been trapped. She looked down at the water, then back at him. And in that look there was no panic, no urgency, no demand. Just something else, quieter, heavier, as if what waited below wasn't simply something to rescue. It was something to reckon with. Dorian felt it before he could name it. A shift, not in the current, in the moment itself. He moved toward her slowly, matching her position. The structure beneath them groaned again, louder. The current surged once, shoving hard against the pinned beams. Dorian crouched at the new edge and looked down. His fingers found something just below the surface. Not fur, not anything alive. Solid. Fixed. He reached down again, closed his grip, pulled. A length of metal chain broke the waterline, links clinking as they shed the current. Not snapped. Cut. Clean and recent. Dorian's jaw set hard. He followed the chain's path, lifting more of it free, tracing its direction. It vanished beneath the structure, anchored to something deeper. The dog watched without reacting, just confirming what he already suspected. He stared back into the murk. The question had shifted. Not what was still breathing down there, but what had been left behind on purpose. He released the chain, let it sink again, links swallowed by dark water. Not now, not yet. He shifted his weight and scanned once more. Nothing moving, nothing alive. The structure groaned, longer this time, a warning becoming a countdown. Dorian rose slowly. Water ran from his sleeves. His body carried the cold now, heavier with it. He looked at the dog. She'd returned to the pups, curled around them again, protective, alert, but no longer pointing, no longer marking anything. He gave one nod, mostly for himself. He said, low. The words didn't bring relief. Just a sense of completion. The rope holding the boat strained as the current shifted slightly. Dorian moved back toward the structure's edge, testing every foothold. The wood flexed beneath him. Unstable, borrowed time. He reached the boat, pulled himself in, controlled, deliberate, muscles slower now, fatigue settling deep whether he admitted it or not. The engine sputtered once when he checked it, still running. He turned back toward the roof. The dog stood watching him, not waiting for a command, waiting for movement. Dorian extended his hand. 23, he said. No hesitation this time. She moved with care, each step precise despite the exhaustion dragging at her frame. She reached the edge, paused, glanced back once at the pups, then jumped. Dorian absorbed her weight as she landed, steadied them both while the hull rocked beneath the impact. She pulled free immediately, turned, checked the pups, then positioned herself between them and the open edge. Not lying down, not resting. Guarding, still. Dorian untied the rope. The current caught them again, pulling the boat slowly from the wreckage. Behind them, the wedged beams shifted. A crack rang out, faint, definitive. Wood surrendering. The roof tilted, then held. Dorian didn't look back. He guided them carefully, angling toward higher ground, away from the stronger pull. The dog stayed motionless, her body curved around the small forms beside her, eyes open, always open. And for the first time since he'd heard that distant sound, no barking. The boat slowed. Not from engine failure. Dorian Hale had eased back the throttle, threading a narrow stretch where the water ran deep and the current twisted without warning. Behind him, the structure had already begun its final collapse. A low crack had rolled across the flooded land moments after they'd cleared it. A sound that needed no visual confirmation. Wood surrendering its hold, weight shifting, another piece of the world folding into the river. Dorian kept his eyes forward. He'd learned long ago that looking back never changed what had already fallen. But the cut chain resting near his boots carried a different story. The German shepherd held her position exactly, curled but not resting, forming a wall between the puppies and the boat's open edge. her body wrapped around them with quiet, deliberate architecture. Not instinct alone, placement. Even now, even safe for the moment. Her breathing had slowed, but barely. Each breath still held the weight of deep exhaustion. The kind rescue doesn't erase. It stays. Quiet. Rooted. Her eyes remained open, tracking. Always tracking. Dorian adjusted course, steering toward higher ground where water thinned along a long, sloping rise. His cabin sat somewhere past that hill, built deliberately above any floodline. One of the few decisions in his life that had required no second thought. The engine held its low, steady hum. Reliable. Unlike most things. He glanced down at the pups again. 4. Small. Fragile. Breathing. The weakest one, the pup that had barely responded at all, lay pressed against the mother's chest. Its body still shook in faint tremors, each breath shallow, uneven. Like it hadn't yet chosen whether this world was worth staying in. Dorian reached down. He adjusted the angle of his jacket where it lay draped beneath them. Not for comfort, for heat retention. The kind of detail most people missed. The kind that separated survival from loss. 24, he said quietly. Not a question, an observation. The dog gave no response, but one ear twitched. She'd heard him. That was enough. The shoreline revealed itself gradually, dark, soaked trunks first, then the rough slope of land rising just above where the flood had stopped. Dorian killed the engine before they reached it. The hum died. Silence filled the gap. Only water remained. He let the boat drift those last few feet, guiding with a paddle. Minimal noise, minimal disruption. Control, always control. The hull met ground that wasn't solid. Mud shifted beneath the boat, soft and treacherous. Dorian stepped out first. His boots sank before catching hold. He tested the footing twice, then lashed the rope to a half-buried fence post. Only after that did he turn back. The dog was already watching, not waiting for permission, waiting for confirmation. __quote, _25 __, he said, low, clear. She rose slowly, every motion deliberate despite the exhaustion dragging at her frame. She stepped forward, then stopped, eyes dropping to the pups, counting. Dorian caught it, not a random scan, a sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4. Only then did she move. She left the boat without jumping, choosing the lowest angle, conserving energy, holding balance, still thinking ahead even now. Dorian lifted the pups one by one, each small body lighter than it should have been. He set them on a patch of higher ground, clear of the shifting mud. The weakest one made a sound, barely there. The dog pressed close immediately, nose against it, breath steady. The path to the cabin wasn't long, but it fought them. Mud grabbed at every step. Debris forced detours. Water still ran in thin, deceptive streams across what had once been solid earth. Dorian carried 2 pups inside his jacket, held tight against his body heat. The others he moved one at a time, returning for each without pause. The dog followed, never ahead, never behind, always beside. The cabin appeared through the trees. Simple, functional. Weathered wood, reinforced shutters, a small raised porch. Not much, but enough. Dorian shouldered the door open. Inside, dry air, cool and still. The kind of stillness that no longer existed outside. He laid the pups on a thick wool blanket near the stove, then moved fast. Fire first, always fire. He knelt, Hands steady, struck the match, fed the small flame into kindling. It caught slowly, then grew. Warmth pushed into the room in uneven waves. Behind him, the dog entered without hesitation. No exploring, no pausing. She went straight to the pups, curled around them again, positioned, watching. Dorian stood for a moment, observing not the room, not the fire, her. She lowered her head toward the weakest pup, but this time she didn't just nudge. She pressed her nose firmly against its side and held it there, still, not checking, not reacting, holding. Dorian's brow tightened. Something different lived in that gesture, something intentional. Then he saw it. The pup's breathing, shallow, ragged, began to shift. Not stronger, but steadier, as if matching something, as if being guided. A quiet tension settled in his chest. He'd seen trained dogs do many things: search, track, guard. But this wasn't command. This was something else entirely, something no training manual could account for. The moment passed as quickly as it arrived. The dog lifted her head slightly, resuming her watch. The pup's breathing stayed fragile, but more consistent now. 26, he said. Again, not a command, a statement. He moved to the sink, filled a metal bowl with water, set it within reach. The dog didn't drink, not yet. Dorian peeled off his soaked shirt and pulled a dry one from a nearby hook. Every motion carried purpose, no hesitation, no excess. Yet his gaze kept drifting back to the same spot. The dog, the pups, the narrow gap between them. From a cabinet he pulled a first aid kit, military surplus, battered but complete. He lowered himself beside them again. Slow, deliberate. Each pup checked. Temperature, breathing, response. The weakest still clung to the edge, barely holding. The dog tracked every movement without interfering. Her eyes followed his hands, her body shifting each time he pressed too close. Not aggression. Control. Dorian paused, leaned back slightly. Gave her the line she'd drawn. Outside, the wind turned. A sound drifted faintly through the trees. Not water, not wood. Something else. Voices. Distant. Thin. Dorian's head angled toward the door. The dog heard it too. Ears lifted, body tight, but she held position over the pups. Didn't break. Dorian rose slowly, crossed to the door, cracked it just enough to see through the trees. Nothing clear. Movement far off. He shut the door, locked it. Not from fear, from habit. When he turned back, the dog wasn't watching the door. She was watching him. Something new lived in that gaze. Not assessment, not focus. Something quieter, something closer to recognition. Dorian held the look for 1 second, then gave a single nod. "Yeah," he murmured. "We're not done." The fire cracked softly. The room held its warmth. The pups shifted beneath the dog's body. Outside, water kept moving, but inside, something had turned. Night came to Ash Hollow without ceremony. No sunset, no colours, just a gradual dimming, as though the sky had decided it had witnessed enough. Inside the cabin, the fire held, low, steady flames curling around blackened logs, throwing amber light across the room. Shadows crawled along wooden walls, shifting with every crack and pop of burning wood. Dorian Hale sat near the stove, elbows on his knees, hands loosely clasped. He wasn't resting. He was listening. The kind of listening that lived beneath sound. The wind outside had shifted direction. Slower now, less violent, but carrying something else. Distance. Space, the quiet residue of something past, but not fully gone. Behind him, the German shepherd stayed fixed in place, curled around all four pups. Protective, still. Her breathing had deepened, though exhaustion still pressed against her frame. The tremor in her limbs had faded, replaced by a stillness that felt chosen rather than spent. She had claimed that position. She was holding it. Dorian glanced back. At her, at them, then down at his own hands. Mud still packed beneath his fingernails. A thin line of dried blood ran across his knuckles where submerged wood had caught him earlier. He flexed his fingers once, slow, controlled, then reached into the pocket of his damp pants. Something emerged into the firelight, a short length of chain, dark metal, rough-cut edge. He'd taken it without thinking, looped around his wrist before leaving the flooded structure. Now, in the stillness, it carried more weight, not physical weight, meaning. Dorian turned it in the light, studying the cut. Clean, too clean. Not torn, not snapped. Cut with intent. He'd seen cuts like that before, not in barns, not in storms. In places where decisions were made fast and permanently. His jaw tightened. "You were tied," he said quietly, eyes moving briefly to the dog. She didn't look at him. One ear flicked. Acknowledgement, not reaction. The weakest pup stirred, a small, uneven motion. Dorian leaned forward. Its breathing was still shallow, but steadier than before. Holding. Barely, but holding. The dog adjusted instantly. Her body curved tighter around it, head lowering, nose brushing along its side. Not urgent, not forceful, just enough. Maintaining contact. Dorian watched that motion, then looked back at the chain. Something didn't fit. If someone had cut the chain, why leave the rest? Why leave anything at all? A soft knock broke the silence. 3 taps, measured, not hesitant. Dorian didn't flinch. His head turned slowly toward the door, listening. No hurry out there, no scramble, just someone standing still. He rose, crossed the room without sound, boots ghosting over worn planks. The dog's head came up, not alarmed, aware. Dorian reached the door, paused, cracked it open just wide enough to see. A woman on the porch, late 30s, maybe early 40s, dark green rescue jacket, mud smeared along the sleeves and hem. Built solid, practical, a body shaped by hard conditions, not comfort. Brown hair pulled tight into a ponytail, damp strands breaking loose. Her face was sharp, not cruel, just focused, the kind that didn't bother softening what didn't need it. Her eyes found his instantly, clear, direct. "You Hale?" Even voice, controlled. Dorian widened the door a fraction. "Depends who's asking." The faintest trace of a smile crossed her mouth. Not warmth, just acknowledgement. "Deputy Lena Cross." She pulled a badge from inside the jacket, held it briefly. "County's running sweep checks. Heard you were still out here." One nod from Dorian. Still standing. Her gaze slid past him into the cabin, toward the dog, toward the pups. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise. Recognition. "Those from the North Ridge?" she asked. "Found them in the water," Dorian said. She leaned forward slightly, not stepping inside, just adjusting her angle. Eyes quick, counting, measuring. 4, she said, quiet. 4, Dorian confirmed. She exhaled. "Lucky?" Dorian said nothing. Luck hadn't touched any of it. Lena's gaze dropped to his hand, to the chain. Her eyes narrowed. Where'd you get that? He lifted it without hesitation. From the structure they were trapped in. She moved closer, close enough that firelight caught the angles of her face. Strong jaw, faint lines at the corners of her eyes, carved by focus, not years. She didn't touch the chain, just looked, longer than necessary. 42, she said quietly. Dorian's brow shifted. What is it then? Lena straightened. Transport chain, used for holding animals before relocation. A pause. Or before they're moved somewhere they're not supposed to be. Silence dropped between them, not heavy, sharp. Dorian looked at the chain again, then back at her. Cut clean, he said. I see that, Lena replied. Her eyes moved to the dog. The German shepherd had lifted her head fully now, watching, not tense but present. Lena studied her a moment, then quieter. That's not just any dog, is it? Dorian didn't answer right away. Then, quote 49. Lena nodded once, as though something she'd already suspected had just been confirmed. She stepped back from the doorway. Water's going to drop more by morning. We'll run a full check on that area, see what's left. Her gaze touched the pups once more, then returned to Dorian. You keeping them here? For now. Another nod. Good. A beat of hesitation. If you find anything else, don't sit on it. His expression didn't shift. He said, a short nod. She turned, stepped off the porch. Her boots struck the ground with a firm, grounded rhythm, moving into the dim light past the cabin. Not hurried, not slow, certain. Dorian closed the door, locked it, stood there a moment with his hand flat against the wood, thinking, then turned back toward the fire, toward the dog, toward the chain. Everything carried a different weight now, not because something new had arrived, because something had been named. The dog watched him as he came closer, gaze steady, unblinking. He crouched again, the chain loose in his hand. The 56__, he said. She didn't move. Didn't flinch, but she held his eyes. Outside the wind shifted, pulling farther off. The water no longer pressed so hard against the land. But the quiet left behind, that was where things would begin. Dorian set the chain beside the fire. Not discarded, not hidden, placed where he could see it. The pups stirred beneath the dog's body. Small movements, life continuing. Dorian leaned back against the wall. His eyes stayed open, watching. Not the door, not the windows. Something between what had happened and what it meant. When he'd pulled that chain from the water, the storm wasn't on his mind. The hands that once held it were. Morning didn't break, it seeped. A thin, reluctant light pressed through the cabin windows, slipping past shutter cracks, drawing pale lines across the wooden floor. The storm had moved on, but the air hadn't forgotten. Damp, thick, refusing to let go. Dorian Hale was already awake. He hadn't truly slept. Same chair beside the stove, shoulders pitched slightly forward, hands loose between his knees. The fire had collapsed overnight into glowing coals that pulsed faint and rhythmic in the dark. The room held a stillness that magnified everything, cloth shifting, a shallow breath, the soft drag of claws on wood. Dorian's gaze lifted. The German shepherd hadn't moved far. She lay curled around the pups, but not in sleep, in purpose. Her body formed a deliberate wall, angled to block approach from the door and the open room beyond. Head low, eyes open, tracking, always tracking. She hadn't slept either, not once. Dorian read it in her, the quiet tension held in every limb, ears responding before sound fully arrived, breath that never deepened past vigilance. This wasn't rest. This was duty. The pup stirred faintly beneath her. 4 small bodies, fragile and alive. The weakest pressed closest to her chest. Its breathing had shifted, still shallow but steadier now. More rhythmic. More there. Dorian leaned forward, watching, then rose. His body fought him, muscles locked from cold and stillness, but he moved through it. He approached carefully, slow enough to avoid triggering her, close enough to see. The dog's eyes found him immediately, not hostile, not welcoming, calculating. He crouched a few feet away, inside her awareness, but outside her line, respecting what she'd drawn. 57, he said. She didn't respond. One ear twitched. That was enough. A knock at the door, not loud, not urgent, deliberate. Dorian stood and turned, crossed the room in quiet, measured steps. When he pulled the door open, morning air pressed in, cooler now, carrying wet earth and the far scent of water. Mr. Calloway stood on the porch. In daylight, the old man seemed smaller, less shadow, more detail. His flannel jacket was damp at the hems, boots thick with drying mud. Deep lines carved his face, age and weather etched together, but his expression held something new beneath the steadiness. Relief. "You made it back," Calloway said. "Got them out." He leaned past Dorian's shoulder. His eyes found the dog, then the pups. A slow breath left him. He murmured. He stepped inside without asking, moving with the ease of someone who never needed permission to be useful. He crouched near the pups, keeping respectful distance. He said quietly, nodding at the mother. Dorian glanced toward her. He said. Calloway gave a small nod, the kind that came from knowing. He said, his voice carried more than observation. It carried years. He reached into his coat, produced a small thermos. He set it on the table. Dorian didn't thank him. Didn't refuse it either. Calloway went on. Dorian's gaze shifted. Northridge? Calloway nodded. First on their list. Silence settled between them, not strained, understood. Calloway rose slowly, joints stiff but sure. "I'll head back down," he said. "Let them know what you found." Dorian gave a single nod. "Appreciated." Calloway paused at the door, glanced back one last time. "At least this time," he said, voice low, "you didn't walk away from it." Dorian said nothing. Calloway didn't need him to. He stepped out and pulled the door shut behind him. The words stayed, not loud, not sharp, present. Dorian turned back toward the fire, toward the dog, toward the pups. The weakest one shifted again, a small movement, but with more force behind it than before. The dog raised her head, not toward the door, not toward Dorian, toward the window. Ears pitched forward. Her whole body drew taut, not aggression, awareness. Dorian traced her line of sight. Past the glass, past the trees, something moved. Not wind, not runoff. A vehicle. Distant, unhurried, deliberate. Too controlled for coincidence. His eyes tightened at the corners. The dog held still. No bark, no shift in posture, just fixed attention. And in that stillness, something that needed no translation. The vehicle slipped behind the tree line and was gone. The dog settled her muzzle back down, resuming her post. But the change lingered. Dorian felt it like a pressure shift. He moved to the window, positioning himself just off-center, where glass wouldn't catch his silhouette. Nothing now. Trees. Light. But the silence had texture. Not empty. Watched. He stepped back, closed the gap between himself and the fire. The chain still rested where he'd left it. Unmoved. Unchanged. But no longer without context. He picked it up again, rotating it slowly between his fingers. Transport chain. Cut clean. Abandoned. A vehicle on a road nobody had reason to drive yet. Too early. Too quiet. He set it down again, deliberately this time. Not as debris, as evidence. The weakest pup let out another thin sound. Dorian crouched, watching. The dog responded instantly, curling tighter around the litter. Protective. Present. __quote _75 ___. Dorian said low. This time, the words weren't meant for her. The fire popped softly behind him. The room grew warmer, but something in the air had shifted. Subtle, anticipatory. Dorian rose slowly, crossed to the table, pulled open a drawer. Tools inside. Old. Maintained. Reliable. He didn't reach for any of them. Just looked. Measured. Closed the drawer. The dog's eyes tracked him again. Not with doubt. Not with confusion. Just attention. Dorian met that gaze, held it a beat, then gave one small nod. Outside, the light strengthened. Water pulled back inch by inch, and somewhere beyond those trees, something moved that had nothing to do with the storm. The land didn't recover all at once. It uncovered itself, slowly, the way a body remembers where it was wounded. 3 days after the storm, the water had drawn back far enough to expose edges. Fence lines, gravel paths, the ghost outline of former fields. Mud took the place of current. Silence replaced violence. Ash Hollow no longer felt like it was drowning. It felt like it was holding its breath. Dorian Hale stood at the boundary of what had been the North Ridge livestock grounds. His boots sank into soft earth, each impression filling slowly with groundwater seeping upward. The air smelled of soaked timber, rust, and something faintly metallic underneath. Not rot, something else. Behind him, a county vehicle sat idling, engine low, steady. Deputy Lena Cross stood a few paces back, hands resting easy on her hips as she took in the scene. In daylight, she looked even sharper. Features composed. Precise. The lines of her face carved more by choices than years. Her uniform jacket had given way to a lighter field vest, mud along the hem, built for function over appearance. She didn't speak first. Neither did Dorian. They both studied the same thing. What remained? The collapsed structure had folded into itself. The roof had surrendered entirely, leaving only splintered beams knotted between two trees. The metal frame beneath twisted skyward like fractured ribs, half exposed now that the waterline had dropped. Calloway stood a few yards off, leaning on a wooden cane he didn't truly need but carried anyway. His eyes moved across the wreckage with patience, piece by piece, as though rebuilding something only he could fully picture. Lena said, her voice level. Dorian gave a single nod. He said. Lena moved forward, deliberate with each step. She crouched beside one of the exposed beams, her gloved hand brushing lightly across the metal. Then she glanced back over her shoulder. She said. Dorian reached into his pocket and passed it over. She turned it in her hand, examining the cut again in natural light. Her jaw set slightly. She said, almost to herself. Then she straightened. She called, not loud. The old man stepped closer, boots pressing into the softened ground. 82, Lena asked. Calloway gave a slow nod. 83, he said. 84. 85, Lena pressed. 86, Calloway answered. Lena's gaze sharpened just slightly. Then somebody else has been here. She wasn't asking. Dorian moved forward, reading the exposed ground. With the water pulled back, the earth had its own testimony. Tracks, not crisp. Tire impressions, faded, half dissolved by runoff, but holding shape where the mud was thick enough. Fresh. Too fresh. He dropped to a crouch, fingers tracing just above the impression. Heavy vehicle. Not agricultural. Wrong tread, wrong spacing. He rose slowly. 88, he said. Lena followed where his eyes pointed, then dipped her chin. 89, she said, barely above a whisper. 90. Dorian turned his attention toward the tree line. Not movement, stillness. One patch of ground disturbed in a way that didn't match the rest. Not dragged across, set down. He approached with measured steps, knelt, peeled back a thin mat of soaked leaves. Underneath, a marking. Nothing organic. A shallow rectangle pressed into the soil with purpose. Faint parallel grooves running along one edge. His fingers hung just above the surface. He didn't make contact. Didn't have to. He'd seen that kind of impression before. Not in fields. Not in barns. In transport crates.